The purpose of this video is to learn how to create an XY scatter graph in Microsoft Excel. This is the most common form of graph we will make during the lab in Chem 1211 and Chem 1212. Let's do an example. You notice the table of data on the slide in front of you is the same table of data I showed you during the creating a table video you should have watched previously. This table contains mass and volume data for water. We want to graph this data. Specifically, we want to create an XY scatter graph using Microsoft Excel. We need to know a few important pieces of information before we begin. Specifically, we need to know which data goes on each axis. In this case, we want to graph the mass on the y-axis and the volume on the x-axis. We also want to make sure that the graph has a title and that each axis is labeled appropriately. Third, we want to add to the graph a linear trend line and display its equation and r-squared value on the graph. We will often use this equation and r-squared value to answer analysis and discussion questions. Finally, we want to place the graph in a Microsoft Word document so that we can make it part of our official lab report as opposed to having to upload two files. To graph this data, we first open a blank Microsoft Word Excel document. I'm going to zoom in here a bit so that you can more easily see what I am doing. Give me just a moment to change the screen size. When you created a graph in Microsoft Excel, whatever data you place in column A will show up on the x-axis, and whatever data you place in column B is going to show up in the y-axis. Because we want volume on the x-axis, we'll place volume in column A, and you recall that was in milliliters. We can adjust the size of column A if we want the whole text description to fit. In column B, we'll place the mass in grams. Now, if you have a table previously created in Microsoft Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, you can copy and paste the data over to your graphing page. If you don't, you got to type in the data by hand. To save time here, I'm going to copy and paste the data from the table I already have here in Microsoft PowerPoint over to Microsoft Excel. I'm going to highlight the data I want, right-click, select Copy, come back to Microsoft Excel, and paste unformatted data. I have now entered the data I wish to graph in Microsoft Excel. To graph the data, we must first select the specific data we want to graph and then continue. We do not want to graph the column headings. We only want to graph the numbers. So you notice that I have now selected all 6 of the numbers, but not the column headings. Click on the Insert tab at the top of the page. You want to insert a graph or chart. You have numerous options to choose from. Do not click Recommended Charts in Microsoft Excel. We want to make an XY scatter chart. So we are going to click that button. When you click the button, you're going to have numerous options to choose from. Typically, I choose a chart where I can see both the dots or data points and the line connecting those data points. So this second option here. Once you click the button, the chart should appear on your page. So that we can see the whole chart, you can actually move the chart to its own sheet in Microsoft Excel. Right-click anywhere on the chart and select Move Chart. This is not necessary, but it makes it easier to show you I'm going to move the chart to its own sheet, which I'm just going to call Chart 1, and I click OK. My chart now takes up a full page. Again, give me just a moment to zoom in so that you can see the chart a little bit better. You'll notice our chart has a space for a title, the line is present on our chart, and that the axes have numbers but no labels. The first thing that we want to do is label our axes. To label the axes, you can click on the Design tab, Add Chart Element, okay, and Axis Titles. And you notice you can add a title to either the primary or x-axis or the primary vertical axis, the y-axis. We're going to do both. And when you click on primary horizontal axis, you notice a box entitled Axis Title appears below the x-axis. We're going to delete Axis Title, and we know that we graphed volume in milliliters on the x-axis. If you forgot what you graphed on the x-axis, go back to the data sheet. Look at what is present in column A. In this case, volume in milliliters, so we know that that's on the x-axis. Similarly, column B contains mass in grams. That'll be on the y-axis. Let's return to our chart and add an axis title for the vertical axis this time. And again, click in the box, delete axis title, and this time type mass in grams. Notice I remembered to include a unit with my axis title. I can also edit my chart title at the top of the page by deleting chart title, and I'm going to call this mass versus volume of water. Mass versus volume, of course, could also be labeled as the density of water, because mass divided by volume is the density, which is represented by the line you see on the graph. Finally, we want to add to the graph a trend line. We want to display the equation of that trend line and its corresponding R-squared value on our chart. To do this, right-click on any data point. Select Add Trend Line. When you do this, a dialog box will appear. In this case, it appears on the side of the page. In other versions of Microsoft Excel, it may appear in the center. The trend line that we wish to include is the default linear trend line. If you scroll down, you will notice at the very bottom, we can select to display the equation on the chart and display the R-squared value on the chart. And when we click these check boxes, we get an equation and R-squared value for our line that pops up on our graph. We can close the Format Trend Line dialog box at this point, and our graph is complete. It is good practice before we go further that you save the graph. Click the File tab, click Save, and select a location to save your graph. Again, I will save this graph on the desktop, and I'm simply going to save it as Book 1 for the moment. The final step in this process is copying and pasting this graph into your lab report in Microsoft Word. Right-click on the graphed area, select Copy, open your appropriate Microsoft Word document, select where you would like to paste the graph, right-click, and select Paste. Your graph is now viewable in your Microsoft Word document. If you click on the graph, you can also slightly resize it. Be sure when you resize the graph that it is still legible and the reader can still get the appropriate information off that graph easily. Finally, you need to save the Word document. Go to File, Save, select the location and file name for the graph or for the document, and click Save. You should now, following these directions, be able to create an XY scatter graph in Microsoft Excel and paste it into a Microsoft Word document for use in a lab report. Let's practice this task. In the previous video, you created a chart or created a table of data in your Microsoft Word document. We now want to graph that data. We want to specifically make an XY scatter graph in Excel. We want to place mass on the y-axis, volume on the x-axis. We want to make sure that the chart has an appropriate title, appropriate labels for each axis, including units, and we want to add a trend line, which will also show its equation and R-squared value on our chart. And finally, we want to copy that graph over into our Microsoft Word document below the data table we previously generated. Of course, don't forget to save your document once you have copied the graph in. The data table that should be created in your document is shown on the screen in case you have forgotten. You should graph that data now. Pause the video so that the data table remains visible while you do the graphing. When you are done, close the video and move to the next video in the sequence.